Hello, my name is Asia Lompat-Chlaszczak. I look after North of Tyne CLLD program. We've prepared this short video to explain and to show you how to fill in a budget form that you need for round 2 CLLD funding. So basically, when you open the Excel spreadsheet, you will see that it consists of 2 tabs. There's one here, budget form, and the other one, hourly rates form. In the budget form tab, you will need to present your full budget for the project. So we will ask you to enter your project name here. And then you will need to present your costs on a quarterly basis. And European funding works on calendar year, so you will see that you've got a summary columns here covering a full calendar year, and all of them should add up to the figures here, which will show you an overall project cost. In this table, we will also ask you to provide us with information on the funding sources for your budget. However, I would advise you to start working on your budget from this tab, hourly rates form. If you have staff working on your project that works only on this project, or is going to work only on your CLLD project, then you don't need to calculate hourly rates for them. However, if your staff will be working on more than one project or more than one activity, you will need to calculate their hourly rates, and then once you will be reporting to us, you will use your hourly rates and the actual number of hours they work, and they will be recording them on timesheets to claim the actual costs. For your budget, however, you need to estimate how many hours they will be working, and you need to calculate their hourly rates based on the information you've got now. So here in this form, project name, let's say my project, and let's say you are going to have a staff member called Alice Brown, and her job title is project manager. And say her annual salary, which is her gross employment cost, so that includes her salary and all the on costs. And her annual salary, let's say, is 19,000. If she works full-time for your organization, then the annual number of hours that you will need to use is 1720. I understand that for some organizations this is not enough. For some organizations the actual hours people work is more. However, we are obliged to use this kind of standard number of hours irrespective of what the actual annual hours in your organizations are. And that little calculation will give you the hourly rate here, and you will need to use it in the main budget form, and I'll show you that in a moment. If you've got a member of staff who works for you part-time, say Joe Blue, and he will be a volunteer coordinator, and say he works for your organization half of the week, say, so his salary will be, say, I don't know, 13,000, and he works for your organization 2.5 days a week, which will be half of that 1720 figure on an annual basis, and you've got his hourly rate here. If for an ESF project you would like to include volunteer time in your budget and use volunteer time as part of your match funding, then you will need to fill in these tables here as well. So here, if you know who the volunteer will be, we ask you to put their name here. If not, then we just put not known yet, for example. So let's say we put here Bob Black, and his role will be to be, I don't know, a cook. So he will be helping the participants of your project, and the activity of your project will be, for example, to use food preparation and cooking and that type of activities to help people towards employability. Right, so he will be, say, a cook. Then how do you calculate his hourly rate? You need to look at the hourly rates provided by the Office for National Statistics. In our handbook, there is a website address to that, to the Office of National Statistics website, where you can find that information. But we've also put it on our website. So if you go to the North of Tyne CLLD website and then apply match funding, you will find this spreadsheet here. So you just click download or open. And here we've just saved the relevant rates, the relevant calculation of the rates that we are obliged to use. So here in this column, in column A here, you've got hundreds and hundreds of different roles. And in this column here, you've got the hourly rates that you need to use. So the first thing would be to find a description here that is most relevant to what your volunteer role will be on your project. So we could say, if our person is going to be a cook, that will be their role on the project. So we can just say, yeah, we just type in cook here, find all, and then you've got, I don't know if you can see it here, you've got a cooks here, and you've got their rate here, 8.38, and then you enter that figure here, and this is the rate that we will expect you to use on the project. Once you've got that, then you can go back to the big budget form here, and here you need to list all the people under direct staff costs. So you've got your project coordinator, project manager, you've got your volunteer coordinator, and you've got your cook, who will be, who will be a volunteer on your project. Then you need to estimate how many hours in a given quarter they will be working. So say your project manager will need to work 20 hours per month times 3 months, because we're covering the whole quarter, times what was their hourly rate? 11.05. So times 11.05, and this is their cost in that given quarter. Your volunteer coordinator will need to work, say, 25 hours a month times 3 months, and then what was his rate? 15.12 times 15.12, and this is their cost for that quarter. Your cook will be working, say, 10 hours a month times 3 months times what was his rate? 8.38 times 8.38, and this is how you present your staff costs. If you've got a member of staff who works all the hours that that person works for your organization, they will be spending on this particular project, then you don't need to have your hourly rate calculation. Then you say it's going to be, I don't know, another volunteer coordinator, two, and all of their salary will be included in that project. So say 3 months, and say their salary is £800 per month, and this will be their cost. Of course, these figures are just random figures, just to show you how the form works. And then you will see that those figures appeared here in the total project cost, and in a similar way you need to do all the quarters of your project, however many you may have for your project. The next step to do this form will be to estimate your direct costs. So your direct costs are all the eligible costs that are directly linked to delivery of your project and are not shared with other project or activities. So if your project are going to support, for example, 15 people, then you may need to offer them ways of getting to your project. So you may cover their travel costs. So travel costs like, for example, bus tickets or metro tickets or whatever will be relevant to your project. You probably need some costs in relation to preparing materials for those 15 participants. You will have some publicity and marketing costs in relation to that particular project. Your staff may need some budget for traveling as well to get to the clients. What else may you need? Maybe some refreshments, room hire. So here you just basically list all the things very specific to your project that you're going to need. And I'm just going to put here very random figures just to show you how the spreadsheet works. Right, so these are your direct costs. Then you also have indirect costs in your budget table. Basically, these costs are costs that are not directly attributed to the project, but are a real cost to your organization. So, say, your organization has an office that your project is run from. So you've got some utility bills, you've got some costs in relation to the building or rental or whatever they are, but they are shared between other activities and projects that your organization is delivering. So instead of trying to apportion those costs and come up with some kind of complicated methodology, what you can do here is use this 15% method of indirect costs. So you are allowed to claim 15% of your direct staff costs as your shared costs. So how you do it is that you need to do 15% of this figure here. So this is the summary of your direct staff costs for that quarter, and then you get that amount that you can spend on all the kind of shared costs that you cannot directly evidence as linked to the project. And then now you've got all your sorry, this should say 0 for now. So you've got all your project cost listed in this column here. So the last thing we ask you to do is to show us your funding sources for the project and split them between CLLD and other. Also, what is quite useful is this little cell here, which will show you the grant rate. So you can, for ERDF, you can apply for maximum 60% of your overall budget, so of that figure. For ESF, you can apply for maximum 50% of your overall costs, so of that figure. And then, depending on what your situation is, what your funding sources are, whether there's any specifics around them, it's just there's different ways of presenting those funding sources. It could be that your match funding is there for your general project cost, and there's nothing kind of specific linked to it. So in that case, you may just want to do, for example, if you're thinking about an ESF project, a 50-50 split per every line. You may want to use volunteer costs as your match funding. Then the whole amount of your volunteer costs will then be reported under other sources. So we just put 25140. You may have some match funding for a very specific post or very specific type of activity. So say you've got your funding secured for your volunteer coordinator. So you just put all of their time, all of the value of their time into this column here. And everything else you may want to kind of get from CLLD. We'll see how that's going to work. So let's say I'm just going to put all of the other costs into this column, and then your indirect costs as well. And then this is a useful, there are two kind of useful checks for you. This is the first kind of check that we would advise you to do. Check if you've got here zeros only. If you've got zeros only, then it's likely that all your figures are inputted correctly and it all adds up how it should be. And then the other check is look at that figure here. It should be lower than 50% or 50%. For ESF and for ERDF, it should be 60% or lower. So all that seems in order. If you, however, if you don't have a very kind of specific requirements about your match funding, you may want to present all your budget headings as kind of split 50-50, for example, for ESF project, which is fine as well. So we'll just do half of that amount here, half of that amount here, and the last one in staff costs. Yeah, there's a mistake somewhere, so you know that straight away because we haven't got a 0 here. Where's the mistake? So, we've divided it by 5 rather than 2. Yeah, we've got zeros here, so everything is fine here. And then we'll quickly just split these ones 50-50. Have we got zeros everywhere? Yes, we do. And then you may want to split your indirect costs 50-50 as well. Right, we've got a minus figure, so there's a mistake. Right, and the mistake is that I divided it by 3 rather than 2. Yeah, zeros everywhere. So these two figures are exactly the same. And what's our grant value? 50%. So that's fine for an ESF project. One more thing to add about your indirect costs. These are the costs that you won't need to evidence. Everything else in your budget, all your staff costs and your direct costs, you will need to evidence using for staff costs. Timesheets, payroll records, bank statements, all the kind of audit trail of these costs. Direct costs, we would expect you to show us invoices, receipts, original bus tickets, all the kind of evidence of payment. So there's quite a lot of kind of evidence that we will require for these. However, for your indirect costs, because we're using this flat rate formula here, you won't need to evidence. Right, and I think this is about it. These are the main things that we wanted to kind of let you know. But obviously, if you've got any questions, any queries in relation to that table, or any other queries in relation to applying to North of Tyne CLLD, please let us know, and we're here to help you. Hope it's been informative and helpful. Thank you very much. Bye.